Now the truth can finally breathe, Dad. Those words echoed through the fog-covered cemetery, colder than the October wind itself. I stood frozen beside Susan's grave, the woman I'd shared 42 years of my life with. I had just lowered her ashes into the ground when my own son David said those words, in a tone that felt more like a verdict than grief. People around us were still crying, but all I could hear was the dull thud of soil falling onto the coffin, like the sound of my heartbeat being crushed. I turned to him. His eyes held no tears, only resentment and something darker, contempt. "What did you just say?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked straight at me. I said, "Mom's finally free." I had never seen that look in my son's eyes before, as if he knew something I didn't. And in that instant I realized, this funeral wasn't the end of pain. It was the beginning of a trial, one without a judge, where guilt and truth would battle in silence. I thought I had just lost my wife, but I was about to lose much more, my son, and the honor I'd spent a lifetime protecting. Don't look away. What happened after that funeral will make you question everything. Does truth really set us free? Or does it destroy what's left to love? My name is Francis Hale, 68, a retired literature professor. All my life, I believed that if you lived with honesty, discipline, and hard work, nothing could ever break you. I used to tell my students, truth is light. Even when it's hidden, it finds a way to shine. But standing over my wife's grave, I realized that same light was now burning me alive. Susan, the only woman who ever made me feel at peace. We met in 1979 when I was just a teaching assistant and she was a psychology major. Long brown hair, a slightly crooked smile, and those listening eyes, she made me forget the world existed. 3 years later, we were married. Those first years were golden. Our little suburban house was always filled with laughter, mornings with her coffee and my poetry, evenings with lullabies and the sound of an old Schubert record. David, our only child, was the center of everything. I taught him reason, Susan taught him compassion. But then came the illness. Susan's first heart attack hit when David was only 8. I can still see her on the kitchen floor, clutching her chest, her eyes wide with fear. After that night, the piano went silent. The only rhythm left in our home was the steady, mechanical beep of a heart monitor. I buried myself in work, publishing, lecturing, traveling, trying to earn enough for her treatment. But the more I worked, the farther I drifted from home. Sometimes I'd come back late and see her sitting by the window, pale in the lamplight. She never complained, she just asked quietly, "Have you noticed how fast David's growing?" I'm afraid I won't get to see him become a man. I'd cut her off, saying, "Don't talk like that, Susan. You'll be fine. I've got everything handled." But maybe. The one thing I never calculated was how little time we had left. As David grew older, he became more like me, rational, reserved, almost cold. Susan used to joke that there was an invisible wall between us. I brushed it off, believing that men didn't need to be emotional to love deeply. But now, looking back, I realized that wall was real, and I was the one who built it with my silence. By 2016, Susan's heart had weakened again. The doctor said surgery was the only option, but it was expensive. So I sold part of our property and borrowed more money, quietly, without telling a soul. When Susan found out, she cried, not from gratitude, but from pain. "Why do you have to carry everything alone?" she said. "I don't need you to be strong. I just need you here." I said nothing. I didn't know how. To me, love meant carrying the burden, not sharing it. Then one evening I saw her writing in a small brown leather notebook, the one she always kept close. When I asked, she smiled and said, "Just a few things I want to say, if I'm ever not around." I laughed it off. "I'm not letting you go anywhere." But behind that smile was something unspoken, a sorrow so deep I was too afraid to face it. 3 years later, on a winter night, Susan collapsed. I remember dialing 911, hands trembling, as David screamed, "Mom!" I held her close, whispering, "Breathe, Susan, please, breathe." But she never opened her eyes again. Her funeral was heavy with tears and condolences. I thought that was the end of my suffering. It wasn't. Because at her grave, my son looked me in the eye and said, "Now the truth can finally breathe, Dad." I didn't know it then, but inside that brown leather notebook, the one David was holding, lay a confession that would shatter everything I'd ever believed about myself. and about the man I thought I was. 3 days after the funeral, the house felt like a second grave. The scent of lilies still lingered in the living room, clinging to the curtains, the books, even the wedding photos I couldn't bear to look at. I brewed a cup of tea and placed it across from Susan's empty chair, a habit that had turned into self-punishment. Then David arrived. No greeting, no eye contact, just a paper bag placed firmly on the table. His voice was rough, tired. "Mom left this. I think you should read it." I stared at the bag and recognized it immediately. Susan's brown leather journal. My throat tightened. What? What did she write in there? David's answer was one word. The truth. He walked out, leaving behind something heavier than grief. Silence that accused me without a sound. I opened the journal. The first line trembled in her familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, Francis, it means I'm gone. And maybe at last, I can finally breathe." My hands shook as I turned the page. "Francis, I never meant to blame you. But there are wounds you never saw, because you were too busy trying to be good. You said you loved me, but sometimes I think you loved the image of your love more than the woman you loved. I tried to tell you about my fear, my pain, but every time I spoke you said, 'Be strong.' Francis, sometimes what I needed most was to be weak, without being judged." I sat there for hours, feeling as if I were listening to my own indictment read aloud. Each sentence cut deeper than the last. In the following pages, Susan wrote about a misdiagnosis back in 2016, a doctor's mistake that left her in agony for months. But what froze my blood was the final line of that entry. "I knew the real diagnosis, but I couldn't tell you because I was afraid you'd see me as weak, afraid you'd be disappointed." I closed the journal, my pulse hammering. Everything I thought was love had been control, care that came with conditions. I had never hit her, never shouted often, but I had caged her inside the golden prison of my perfection. That night, David came back. He stood in the doorway, eyes hard as glass. "I read it all," he said. "Mom tried to tell you, but you always made her stop." "It's not what you think, David." "Then tell me," he snapped. "What were you two arguing about that night she died?" I froze. I remembered every detail. I'd lost my temper because she forgot to take her pills. "Are you trying to test my patience, Susan?" I'd shouted. She said nothing, only whispered, "You'll never understand." And then she collapsed. David's voice trembled with fury. She wrote that on that night, for the first time, she wished she didn't have to breathe anymore. I don't know whether it was the cup that shattered went out or my heart. He left again, slamming the door, leaving me alone with a half-open journal and a house filled with ghosts. Under the yellow lamplight, the last page seemed written in pain. "If one day the truth can breathe, let it live. Don't suffocate it with your pride." Now I understood. The truth David spoke of at the grave. It was his mother's final plea for freedom, a cry I never heard while she was still alive. But I had no idea that buried within those remaining pages was something far worse, a secret name written over and over, beside a final warning. Don't trust anyone, especially the one who once promised to protect you. A name I never expected to see again, someone who was about to return and tear my life apart. 3 days after that cold confrontation with David, I was still drowning in Susan's journal when a knock echoed through the house, soft, even unmistakably deliberate. I opened the door, and there stood Martha, Susan's old friend from the psychology department. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. Her face was thinner now, her eyes sharper, and her smile, a blade wrapped in courtesy. "My condolences, Francis," she said in her raspy voice. "Susan was my closest friend. I came to return something. Something you should have known a long time ago." She handed me a thick yellow envelope. On the front, in uneven handwriting, "Confidential, internal file." I hesitated. She pressed it into my hand. "The hospital hid this from you, Francis. Susan's death wasn't an accident." Her words sent a chill through my spine. I tore the envelope open. Inside was a medical report stamped by the hospital. Cause of death, digoxin overdose, administered incorrectly by primary caregiver. I couldn't breathe. I was Susan's only caregiver. "No, that's impossible," I muttered. "I followed the prescription exactly." "The evidence is right there," Martha said calmly, as if lecturing a student. "Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe something worse. Either way, you'll have to face it. I looked at the doctor's signature. Dr. Morgan, Susan's longtime physician. When I called the hospital, they told me no such file existed. I turned back to Martha. Where did you get this? Susan gave it to me before she died. She said, if the truth ever gets buried, make sure he finds it. There was something wrong in her tone. Too smooth, too practiced. Why now, Martha? Why give it to me after all this time? Because David read the journal, she said flatly. He deserves to know how his mother really died. My knees weakened. Hours later, David came storming in. He threw a copy of the report onto the table, his voice breaking with rage. You gave Mom the wrong dose. Now I understand everything. No! Who told you? Martha did! She said Mom begged for help and you ignored her. Are you still going to lie? I stared at him, his eyes bloodshot, burning with betrayal. I wanted to scream that it wasn't true, that I'd die before I hurt his mother. But in that moment, words were useless. All I had left to prove my innocence was a trembling memory and a conscience no one believed in anymore. Martha stood outside on the porch, watching us, that faint, cruel smile back on her lips. Truth might arrive late, she murmured, but it never dies, Francis. I wanted to confront her, to ask what she really wanted, but David had already walked out, slamming the door like a verdict. That night, I combed through Susan's journal again, every line, every page, until I found a loose note tucked in the back corner, scribbled in haste. Don't trust anyone who says they understand my pain, especially Martha. The words hit me like a bullet. Martha, the friend Susan once trusted. Martha, the woman who used to look at me too long during department dinners. Martha, who once whispered, "You don't deserve her." Now I understood. She hadn't come to bring me peace. She'd come to destroy what was left. But why? And worse, would David listen to me one last time, before Martha's poison turned him completely against his father? I thought I'd reached my limit. But pain, it seems, always finds more room to grow. One gray morning, while sorting Susan's papers, my phone rang. David's voice came through, cold, metallic, and laced with rain hitting his end of the line. Dad, I found what you tried to hide. Before I could respond, the line went dead. 2 hours later, he showed up, drenched, eyes wild, holding a USB drive. Without a word, he tossed it onto the table. Security footage, the night Mom died. My stomach dropped. The camera, the one I'd thought was broken years ago, had been working. I never checked it. I never had a reason to. David opened his laptop, plugged it in. The video was grainy, flickering, but clear enough. There I was, standing in the living room, face tight, a bottle of pills in hand. Susan sat on the couch, speaking, though no sound came through. I pointed at her, frustrated, pacing. She began to cry. Then, a sharp movement. The image froze. David's voice shook with fury. You said it was a heart attack, but I saw it. You yelled at her. You scared her. It's not what you think. What then? You didn't mean to. You just frightened her to death? His words pierced like knives. He wasn't wrong. I had shouted. Not out of anger, but fear. She'd forgotten her pills again, and I panicked. I only wanted her to take the medicine. I didn't want to hurt her. But you did, he screamed. She was terrified of you, Dad. Can't you see that? His voice broke, raw and shaking. He slammed his hand on the table. The teacup shattered, glass and water sprang across his arm. But he didn't flinch. Mom wrote it in her journal, he said through clenched teeth. I'm afraid to tell the truth, because every time I'm weak, Francis becomes someone else. You know that line? I've read it 10 times. I felt my throat close. My words turned to dust. David, please, you don't know everything. Your mother... Enough! He roared. I've spoken to a lawyer. Mom deserves justice. If you won't tell the truth, the court will. I froze. You're going to sue your own father? He met my gaze without flinching. Not going to. I already have. I took a step toward him, desperate, but he backed away, eyes full of betrayal. I used to look up to you, Dad, he said quietly. But what kind of good man makes his wife die in fear? And then he was gone. The door slammed like a sentence. I turned to the laptop. the video frozen on Susan's face, her eyes wide, filled with both terror and love. I reached out, trembling, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Susan. I didn't kill you, but I let you die alone." That night, I couldn't look away from the screen. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, the wind howling through the cracks. I replayed the footage over and over, searching for something, anything, to prove I wasn't a monster. And then I saw it. A flicker in the corner of the frame. A shadow. A figure standing outside the window, barely visible under the stormlight. A woman, wearing a black coat. Hood pulled tight. I paused the frame, zoomed in. Even blurred, I knew. It wasn't me. It was Martha. She was there that night, watching. I didn't sleep that night. The image of the woman in the black coat standing outside the window kept looping in my mind, a haunting reel that refused to stop. I zoomed in, slowed it down, brightened the frame again and again. No matter how grainy it was, I knew that silhouette, Martha. The next morning, I went back into Susan's room. Everything was still as she left it. The blanket folded neatly on her side of the bed, the faint trace of her perfume on the pillow, and the wooden drawer where she used to keep her letters. I opened it, sifting through the past like a man digging through ashes, searching for one last ember of warmth. At the very back, beneath a pile of old medical papers, I found a small beige envelope. On the front, written in her soft, slanted handwriting, "For Francis, open when you're ready to look back." I froze. The seal was intact, edges yellowed. It had been written long ago. I tore it open, caught between dread and fragile hope. Inside was a letter, handwritten, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the paper, ink blurred by what could only have been tears. "Francis, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you myself. But there's one thing you must know. I was never afraid of you. I was afraid of the distance, the space that grew between us every time you tried to be strong. You never did anything wrong. You just loved me in a way that left no room for me to be myself." My vision blurred, but the next lines froze me completely. "Someone's been trying to drive us apart. Martha. I know she loved you once, years ago. When you turned her down, she was dismissed for violating department policy. She never forgave you. Lately, she's been visiting me, saying you still cared for her. I didn't believe it, but she brought papers and said she wanted to help me see who you really are." The letter slipped from my trembling hands. The final piece of the puzzle had fallen into place. Martha hadn't come to comfort Susan. She had been poisoning her trust for years, twisting love into suspicion, and turning my wife's heart against me one whisper at a time. I picked the letter up again, my chest tight with grief. "If something happens to me, don't trust anyone but your own heart. I've already forgiven you, because even though your love was clumsy, it was never fake. But do one last thing for me. Don't let the truth be twisted." It ended with a single line, hurriedly written, slanted across the bottom. "I still love you, and I believe that when our son knows everything, he'll call you father again." I couldn't stand. My legs buckled as years of guilt and silence poured out of me. I fell beside the bed, clutching the letter to my chest, shaking uncontrollably. Then, a knock. Sharp, insistent. I wiped my face and opened the door. David stood there, pale and tense, rain in his hair, his eyes conflicted. "I came to pick up some of Mom's things," he said, voice hoarse. I nodded silently. As he stepped inside, his eyes landed on the letter in my hand. "What's that?" "A letter from your mother," I said softly. "To me." "Were you planning to hide it?" I shook my head and held it out. "No, I was going to let you read it, but only if you're ready to know everything." He hesitated, then sat down. I placed the letter in his hands. He read in silence, for so long that I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. When his eyes reached Martha's name, his face changed. Disbelief, then anger, then shame. "Is this true?" he whispered. "Martha? She was in love with you?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And when I turned her away, she turned that love into hate. Your mother got caught in it." David's hands trembled as he folded the letter. His voice cracked. I believed her. I even sent the hospital report to the police." I exhaled slowly. Now you understand why your mother said the truth couldn't breathe, because everyone was choking it in their own way. We sat there, two broken men surrounded by ghosts and the faint scent of wilting lilies. Neither of us spoke, but for the first time since Susan's death, David's eyes no longer looked at me like I was her killer. Outside, the rain had stopped. A pale light filtered through the window, touching Susan's photo on the wall, her smile still soft, still forgiving. I knew then the fight wasn't over, but from this moment on, I would fight not for my pride, but to clear the name of the only love I ever truly had. St. Michael's was packed. Candles lined both aisles, their flames trembling like the last breaths of memory. Susan's photo rested inside a ring of white lilies. That tilted smile of hers made my heart lurch. 40 days since the funeral, and more people than I imagined had come. Friends, colleagues, former students. Everyone had a story about gentle Susan, and selfless Susan. I sat in the third pew with her letter, creased and worn, pressed into my jacket pocket like a final will. When the priest finished, he invited the family to speak. I rose, but David stepped up first. He took the microphone, swept his gaze over the crowd, then let it land on me. His eyes weren't knives anymore, but they weren't healed either. He stood on the edge between belief and doubt. And at the lip of that cliff, the one who'd been pushing us over, was smiling. Martha, front row, black mourning scarf, posture straight as a penitent friend. "Thank you for being here," David began, voice so steady it was unnerving. "My mother lived a good life, but there are things about her death I misunderstood." A hush rippled through the pews. Martha angled her head, the corner of her mouth tightened. David went on. "I accused my father, because I had one piece of the puzzle. Today I brought the others." He held up a USB drive, heads turned toward the side screen, the same one they'd used to loop photos of Susan as a girl. David nodded to the tech. A few seconds later, the footage appeared. Grainy, our living room that night, Susan and me arguing, the pill bottle on the table, my gestures too sharp. A collective heartbeat dropped. Somewhere, someone exhaled. "Oh my God." My grip locked on the back of the pew. This was the moment that nearly destroyed me. But David didn't stop. He slowed the playback. 17 frames after Susan stood up, a shadow at the window, someone in a black coat, flickered into view. My pulse kicked. The murmur swelled. "There's someone there." "Who is that?" David killed the screen, set the USB down, and pulled a photocopy of Susan's letter from his pocket, her handwriting clear. He didn't read it all, only this: "If anything happens to me, trust nothing but your own heart." Martha so doubts I wasn't strong enough to fight. A candle cracked. Martha shifted. "Today, I'm not here to clear my father," David said, lower now. "I'm here to clear my mother. She never wanted her death used as a weapon to destroy us. I was wrong to let anger lead, and I want to hear my father speak, right here." He looked at me. The priest nodded me forward. My legs felt like lead, but one glance at Susan's picture told me this was the moment truth had to step into the light and stop gasping in the dark. I took the mic, every stare heavy on my shoulders. Faces that once greeted me with respect awaited a fall. "My name is Francis," I said, voice rough. I was never worthy of Susan's gentleness. Whispers rose and fell. I lifted my eyes to the front row. That night I yelled at Susan, out of fear, out of stupidity, but I did not give her the wrong dose. I kept every prescription the way I kept my own breath. And I believe someone was outside our house that night. That person is here today. Martha's soft laugh needled the air. "Francis, what are you implying?" She stood, hand on her chest. "I'm here to honor my friend, not to listen to lies." I pulled a packet from my folder. A copy of Susan's letter. A written statement from the hospital that the caregiver blame report doesn't exist in their system, and a receipt showing who'd requested the so-called internal file. Martha Keene. Holding them up steadied my voice. "If you came to honor Susan, why request and circulate a confidential report the hospital can't find in its records? Why does your name appear on the gate camera at my house that night? Why were you the one who walked my son into the police station?" The room shattered into noise. Martha went pale, recovered fast. "I loved my friend. I wanted justice for her." "Then let justice begin with truth," I said, turning to David. The truth is this: Susan believed in love. She forgave me. As for me, today, I will not forgive manipulation. Martha opened her mouth, but another woman's voice rose from mid-pew. I saw her at Francis's gate that night. Heads whipped around. It was Lynn, my neighbor across the street, hands shaking as she stood. Around 9:30, black coat. I thought it was a prowler. Silence sucked the air from the church. David looked from me to Martha. The last struggle flickered behind his eyes. I took a breath and lowered the mic. I'm not asking anyone to believe me on the spot. I'm asking for one thing: let the truth breathe. From here on, we go all the way. In the photo, Susan seemed to wear a sad little smile. I knew the public fight had just begun. I stepped down, clutching the USB, the letter, and the fragile belief that justice might be slow, but it comes. The memorial ended like a storm that had passed, but left debris everywhere. I barely made it to the steps before a semicircle formed around me, eyes, whispers, even their breaths felt like verdicts. Susan's cousin Linda pushed to the front. Uncle Francis, if what you said is true, why didn't you bring it up sooner? We've been humiliated for weeks because of you. Another voice jumped in. We heard you're under investigation, that there's solid evidence. Now you're pinning this on Martha. She was the only one taking care of Susan while you were off teaching. I was standing inside a ring of invisible indictments. People who used to greet me as Professor Hale looked at me like a murderer who'd slipped the noose. Martha lingered at the edge, arms folded over her purse, feigning calm while the tiniest smile tugged at her lip. She knew. The crowd was her weapon. I drew a breath and kept my tone level. I can live with being hated. I won't live with Susan being turned into someone's playing card. You speak so nicely, Linda snapped. But for weeks you said nothing. If David hadn't stepped up, no one would know you yelled at her that night. I met her eyes, didn't flinch for once. You're right, my silence was wrong. But do you know why I kept quiet? Because people prefer what feeds their outrage over what challenges their certainty. The air thickened. A huddle of middle-aged women murmured. A man cut in. If you're clean, let the courts handle it. Stop performing out here. I scanned the faces, familiar and newly cold. Only one stood slightly apart, Lynn, the neighbor who'd spoken inside. Her gaze didn't waver. I know what I saw, she said louder now. I'm not picking sides. I saw Martha outside Francis's gate that night. I even spoke to her over the fence. She told me, Susan needs space. An hour later, the ambulance came. The ring hesitated, color drained from Martha's face. You're lying, she shouted. I was home all evening. I pulled out my phone and cued the clip David had shown, the silhouette in the black coat at the window, held it up for those nearest to see. If that's my house, I said, and that figure isn't me, who else but you, Martha? She stumbled back a step, grasping for words. You're fabricating this? Pinning it all on me to save yourself? I held her gaze, voice low but carrying. I don't need saving. I need the truth. If you're innocent, welcome a full pull of every neighborhood camera from that night. If not, you should pray, because I won't be silent again. The cousins buzzed. David stood off to one side, eyes moving between us. I could feel the storm inside him shifting. A man asked, cautious, Francis, if this is all fake, who's behind it? What does she want from you? I answered clean and hard. What people want when they're rejected. Revenge, fueled by doubt. No one spoke. Martha turned on her heel and strode off, heels striking the stone like blades. David watched her go, then looked back at me. Dad, do you have anything else? I do, but I want the police to confirm it. Not because I need them to believe me, because your mother deserves clarity. For the first time in days, David gave a small nod. I stepped out of the ring. The air seemed to thin. On the steps, the late light fell across Susan's photo in my hands. Her smile seemed to say, Keep going, Francis. You're finally facing the right way. I tightened my grip. This wasn't about reputation anymore. This was the first counterstrike to win back the truth. For Susan, for David, and for whatever's left of my soul. By late afternoon, rain set in. Not a downpour, one of those slow, stubborn rains, as if the sky were trying to wash something old off the earth. I drove south to the edge of town where Martha lived. Small house, tired paint, mud pooling in the dips of the road. I didn't call. And she opened the door with a teacup in hand, too composed to be surprised. "I figured you'd come," she said, a trace of mockery in her voice. "You always did like to resolve things with conversation, didn't you, Professor?" I stepped inside. Damp and smoke clung to the room, paper pinned to the walls, old clippings and photos of Susan and me from years ago. I stopped. In one frame, Susan beamed at the camera. Beside her, Martha stared, not at the lens, but at me. "Why keep these?" I asked, throat tight. "To remind me," she said, "that once I believed I was someone worth loving." The air grew heavy. Old wounds don't close cleanly. "Martha," I said carefully, "Susan didn't deserve to be dragged into your resentment." "Resentment?" She laughed, shoulders shaking. "You call it resentment. I call it justice, Francis. Remember the night you said, 'I could never love you, Martha'? You humiliated me, in front of everyone." She hurled the cup. Tea splashed and crawled across the floor. I lost everything. My job, my name, my faith in people. And you, husband, father, the moral halo everyone adored. I wanted you to taste what I swallowed. Suspicion, scorn, being treated like trash. I let the words land. "And Susan?" I asked quietly. "You made her doubt me. You left her to die with those doubts. That's your justice?" Her eyes flashed with something tangled, guilt, triumph. "I didn't plan her death. I sent a few anonymous letters, some honest advice. She was weaker than I thought. But when she died, opportunity knocked. I gave David what he craved. Half-truths." I clenched my fists until my knuckles blanched. "You shattered my family." "No," she said softly. "You did that years ago. I merely widened the crack." Anger surged, then thinned into a different ache. The woman in front of me was less a villain than a ruin. "I thought you just wanted to hurt me," I said. "But you only wanted to be unforgettable." "By any means, no matter how cruel." Silence. Rain pounded the glass. For a second, her gaze wavered. "You're right," she rasped. "I wanted you to remember. But now, I can't stand the remembering either." I set the fake hospital file on the table and slid it toward her. "The police traced this to your printer. I filed a report this morning. But I didn't come for revenge." "Then why are you here?" "To tell you I forgive you. Not because you deserve it. Because Susan wouldn't want me living on hatred." A dry, disbelieving laugh. "Forgive me? You think I need that?" "No," I said, turning for the door. "But you need to hear that the pain you sowed can't outlive the love she left." Behind me, her voice cracked. "Francis, did she ever say she was happy?" I paused, glanced back, and nodded. She said, "Even when the world tightens its grip, I still feel loved." "You can hate me all you want, Martha. You'll never erase that." I stepped into the hard rain. The door slammed shut, another old tragedy ending with the weather, but I knew the real battle waited ahead, where courts and public eyes would decide what the truth is, and what remains of us after it's told. 3 days after my showdown with Martha, a thick envelope from the court landed in my mailbox. A notice for a preliminary hearing. Plaintiff, David Hale. I tore it open, every line cut like glass. Plaintiff, David Hale. Defendant, Francis Hale. Claims: concealment of cause of death of Susan Hale. Fraudulent management of family assets. My knees buckled. I gripped the table to stay upright. I'd salvaged a piece of my name in public, but the law doesn't deal in sympathy. And the rage of a son who lost his mother. No one can muffle that. The next morning I met with Attorney Bennett, a former student of mine. He studied me for a long moment, pity barely concealed. "Are you sure you want to face David in court? The law is merciless. If this goes public, every wound gets reopened on the front page." I nodded. "I'm not trying to win, Bennett. I'm trying to keep the truth from being twisted again." He slid a folder across the desk. "Then we start here. Every asset, the will, and all medical records tied to Susan. If you're clean, the paperwork will speak." I stared at the stack, what was left of a life with Susan, reduced to signatures and seals. My only shield now. 2 weeks later, a formal summons arrived. The press smelled blood. The Herald-Post ran a banner headline. "Professor Francis Hale sued by son, mystery behind wife's death." My phone wouldn't stop. Neighbors ducked away. Former students emailed to say they were shocked and disappointed. I didn't blame them. In this world, rumor sprints miles before the truth laces its shoes. That night, David called, his first time reaching out since the memorial. You got the court papers? I did, but you don't have to do this. Your mother. My mother is dead, he snapped. Stop hiding behind her. His voice trembled. Between the anger, I heard grief. I need to know if you ever did anything that made her afraid. Yes, I said. I made her lonely. Then I'll let the court decide whether that loneliness killed her. The line clicked dead. I sat in the dark, desk lamp watching Susan's photo in a small circle of light. You see, I whispered to her. We're going to court over a crime you never charged me with. Next day, Bennett handed me another document, a countersuit. If we leave this alone, they'll trample the truth. We file back, document forgery and defamation. The person behind David is Martha Keene. I hesitated. Countersue my own son? You expect me to live with that? Not David, he said softly, the shadow steering him. His eyes hardened. Courtrooms aren't for tears. They're for proof. Sometimes forgiveness needs evidence. I signed. My hand shook, but the stroke was firm. That signature wasn't the start of a father-son war. It was a promise to Susan. I will say everything, no matter who hates me for it. That night I opened the windows. The rain had just stopped. The air smelled of wet earth. In the distance, the church bell tolled long and low, like a countdown to a trial that wouldn't just judge actions, but weigh our souls. The courtroom was small, the air heavy like a storm gathering. Metal pens tapped, whispers skittered. I sat at the defense table, fingers locked around the file Bennett had assembled. Across the aisle, David between two young attorneys. His eyes were no longer blazing, only exhausted. Behind the gallery rail, Martha watched in a gray coat, mouth slightly curved, as if the show she directed had reached its best scene. The judge summarized the allegations. I had willfully concealed the cause of death and manipulated family assets to evade responsibility. Each phrase landed like a hammer on bone. Counsel for the plaintiff. David's lawyer rose, smooth and practiced. My client, David Hale, only son of the deceased Susan Hale, believes the defendant, Mr. Francis Hale, acted without transparency during his wife's illness and committed fraud in managing marital assets. Martha tipped her chin, eyes flashing. I knew where their information had come from. Bennett stood, straightening his tie, voice calm and cutting. Your Honor, my client isn't running from responsibility. He is here to tell the whole truth, including the truth about the person who constructed this narrative. He set two binders on the evidence table. First, certified bank records. All of Mr. Hale's assets, savings, equities, insurance, were transferred to Susan Hale in 2018, 4 years before her death. There is no concealment, no siphoning. If this is asset manipulation, one must ask, who exactly was being manipulated? The room stirred. David bent over the pages, his face faltering. Second, regarding the alleged concealment of cause of death. Bennett's tone hardened. The original records from St. Mary's Hospital verified contain no document stating Mr. Hale administered an incorrect dosage. The sole accusatory report, fed to the media, was forged. It was printed from the IP address of Martha Keene. The gallery erupted. Martha shot to her feet. Lies! I only relayed what Susan sent me! Bennett turned, eyes ice-bright. We have evidence you accessed Susan's email 1 month before her death using an old password. This is the cyber unit's report. Would you like to deny it under oath? Color drained from Martha's face. She opened her mouth, but the judge's gavel cracked down. Order! David looked at me, layers of doubt peeling away. I shook my head slightly. Don't gloat. I won't win by humiliating anyone. Bennett faced the bench again, voice gentler. This isn't a father versus son case. This is a family split apart by lies. My client wants one thing, to restore the honor of his late wife and to return a whole truth to her son. He placed the original of Susan's letter on the table, backed by a handwriting expert's certification. In it, Susan wrote, I believe that when our son knows everything, he'll call you father again. We believe that day is close. Silence. David's head bowed. His hand trembled on the page. Tears fell. Quiet, not of rage, but of a man letting go of a false certainty he'd clung to too long. The judge paused, then said, "The court will recess to review the additional evidence. Trial is set for 10 days from now." Gavel. The air released. Martha slipped toward the aisle, avoiding my eyes. But I knew. The wall she'd built had begun to crack. I turned to David and said softly, "You see, the truth doesn't have to shout. It just has to stand." He looked up and whispered, "Dad, can I borrow that letter?" I nodded. For the first time in months, his voice held no blade. News of the hearing raced like a brush fire. Within 48 hours, Professor Francis Hale, wife's death suspect, flooded every outlet again. But this time, my photo didn't sit beneath a guilty headline. Reporters were asking a new question. Was the source a vengeful old friend of the victim? Martha panicked. She called David, insisting, "Your father's manipulating the press." But once the gears of truth start turning, no one can jam them by hand. On the fourth morning after the hearing, Bennett walked in with a large envelope. "It's time for the last push," he said, laying out 3 originals: wire transfers, a deed, and the 2018 asset transfer agreement putting everything in Susan's name. "These are notarized and court verified," he said. "I've sent copies to the Herald Post. They'll publish tomorrow." I balked. "Bennett, you're bringing the press in?" "Not to win public opinion, to stop it." Once the truth is public, Martha loses her last weapon. I sat with it, then nodded. "Do it, but keep David out of this. He's had enough." For the first time since it began, Bennett smiled. "Don't worry, the press isn't on our side. They're on the side of documents." The next morning, Herald Post dropped early. Front page, Susan in her garden, eyes kind and clear, next to a new headline: "Truth exonerated, forged records and personal vendetta in the Hale case." 2 full pages trace the scheme. Martha Keene, former colleague, suspected of fabricating the caregiver blame file to strip Francis Hale of his reputation. Alongside ran St. Mary's official verification and a quote from a cybersecurity investigator. All transmitted documents originated on Mrs. Keene's machine. The town lit up. I cracked a window. Last night's rain still clung to the leaves. Neighbors passed and, for the first time in months, nodded. Social media filled with, "We believed the wrong story. Martha's going to be charged, watch." What undid me, though, was a brief op-ed signed David H. "I'm the son in the articles you're reading. I believed a lie and treated my father like a criminal. Today I understand that sometimes truth doesn't need a defender. Just time. I'm sorry, Dad." I had to sit down. My hands shook. I never knew a sentence could pierce and heal in the same breath. That afternoon, Martha was taken into custody pending charges for document forgery and knowingly feeding false information to the press. Cameras flashed as officers led her out. She kept her composure, throwing me one last look, venom laced with something like despair. I didn't feel triumphant, only tired. Justice rarely arrives to applause. It comes in quiet. Bennett squeezed my shoulder. "You won, Professor." I watched the sun sink and said, "No, Bennett. Susan won." She forced all of us to face the truth, including me. That night I sat down to write, not for reporters, not for the court, for myself. On the first page, I once suffocated the truth with pride. The woman I loved taught me this: truth only breathes in a heart brave enough to admit it's wrong. Candlelight flickered across Susan's photo. I smiled, lighter than I'd felt in years. The legal war was ending. Ahead lay another battle, the long work of mercy and forgiveness, just beginning. I thought the storm would pass after Martha's arrest. Turns out, that was only the prologue. 3 days after the exonerating article, social media exploded. This time not with reporters, but with thousands of anonymous accounts pumping out spliced audio and behind-the-scenes photos someone had seeded. The fastest spreading clip was only 10 seconds, pulled from the old video, me shouting at Susan, "Stop pretending, Susan," and then a hard cut, right before I stepped forward to hold her. No one saw what came after. They only saw my face twisted with fear that looked like rage. Captions screamed, "Is this the man the whole country feels sorry for?" And the comments were knives made of words. No one talks to someone they love like that. If he's innocent, why did she write such a desperate journal? Virtue signalers always know how to cry on cue. I sat at the screen, reading every line. It hurt so much I could hardly breathe. David called. Panicked. "Dad, they're using Mom's image for clicks. Some channels are reenacting her fall with actors." "I've seen it, David. Breathe. Breathe. They're killing her all over again. I heard him choke up on the line. In that moment I knew, even when justice wins, the crowd can turn victory back into a wound. That afternoon Bennett showed up. He dropped a printout of a digital headline on my table, blood red type. Did Professor Hale buy the court? I laughed once, hollow and tired. I don't have anything left to lose, Bennett. If they want me to be a monster, let them. He shook his head. No, Professor, this isn't about your reputation anymore. This is a war over memory. If you let them keep smearing Susan, you're betraying the very woman you love. I went quiet. He was right. I couldn't let Susan's face be a prop for people who monetize tragedy. Bennett leaned in, voice steady. I've got a plan. We stop dodging the media. We face it. A live interview. You tell the whole story, start to finish, nothing staged. I'll set it up with Channel 9. They want exclusive. If we stay silent, someone else keeps telling your story for you. I looked at him. I was afraid of the lights, the microphones, the questions that cut like blades. Then I thought of Susan, who once told me, "You can't control the truth, you can only live with it." I nodded. Fine, but I won't read from a script. I'll speak from the heart. And that's exactly what they need to hear, Bennett said. No one can fake truth when the emotion is real. I didn't sleep the night before the broadcast. On my desk, Susan's letter lay beside a cold cup of tea. I read it for the 100th time. I believe when our son knows everything, he'll call you father again. Under it, I wrote my answer. And when the world knows everything, they'll remember you as the woman who taught us all how to forgive. Outside, a warm season wind carried the smell of first rain through the trees. Tomorrow I would face the world, not to defend myself, but to give back a voice to the one who will never speak again. Channel 9's studio blazed with light. The smell of makeup, hot wiring, and metal from the microphones mingled into a stifling air you could almost drink. I sat center stage, staring into a forest of cameras, the light so bright I couldn't make out the host's face. The place was packed. Reporters, selected audience members. Utterly silent. They'd come to watch the man once suspected of killing his wife explain himself. From backstage, Bennett gave me a small nod. Speak from your heart, not the statute book. The tally light glowed red. The host, Rachel Cole, smiled with that immaculate on-air calm. Good evening. Tonight on Channel 9, after months of controversy, Mr. Francis Hale, the central figure in the lawsuit and nationwide debate, speaks for the first time. A sparse round of applause. I drew a breath and lifted my head. Rachel's first question was gentle in tone, sharp in edge. Mr. Hale, many viewers say that regardless of the court's findings, your behavior in the video is unacceptable. Do you regret it? I looked straight into the lens, into the living rooms of millions waiting for excuses. I do regret it, I said slowly, but not for the reason they think. I regret loving Susan in a way that made her feel she had to be strong all the time. I taught thousands of students that truth is light, but I forgot that sometimes light blinds. The studio held its breath. Rachel blinked, surprised. So you admit you were wrong? I was wrong, I said, but I'm not guilty. I didn't kill Susan, not with my hands, though maybe with my silence, and silence can be a kind of blade. Someone sniffled in the audience. I didn't look to see who. Rachel pivoted. Some claim you're rehabilitating your image, that your exoneration is just PR. Your response? I gave a thin, honest smile. PR can't raise the dead. It can't force a son to forgive his father. I don't need a public makeover. I need people to remember Susan as she truly was, a kind woman, not a plot device in a melodrama. I took Susan's original letter from my pocket, soft with wear, ink blurred at the corners. This is the letter she wrote to me. I've never read it publicly. Tonight, I'd like to share a part of it. I unfolded it, my voice shook. Francis, if anyone asks whether I was happy, tell them yes. Even when I was afraid, I never stopped loving you. I only hope that, after everything, you won't turn your mistakes into chains, but use them to learn how to love better. The studio went still. Rachel dipped her head. Thank you. One last question. What do you say to those who still don't believe you're innocent? I looked into the glass and tried to find Susan there. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm asking you to remember that truth doesn't live in clips, headlines, or comment threads. It lives in how we treat other people's pain. If anyone watching feels misunderstood tonight, hear this. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. It may cost you everything, but silence will cost you yourself. The lights softened. Applause rose, not loud, but long and true. I bowed my head, and warm tears finally came. After the broadcast, social media flipped like a tide. He's not acting, he's hurting, and it's real. First talk show that made me cry. As for me, I sat in the dark and listened to the rain at the window. In my heart, I whispered, "Thank you, Susan. The truth is finally breathing." Morning broke through my curtains for the first time in months. The phone wouldn't stop. Texts, emails, calls, but this time, not curses. Across the internet, hashtag let the truth, breathe held the top spot for 48 hours. One comment from Mary Anderson 98 read, "I lost my mother to cancer. I know that instinct to blame someone just to make grief lighter." Hearing Mr. Hale, I realized, sometimes truth doesn't need winners, just people willing to understand. Hundreds of think pieces followed. Outlets that once condemned me posted public corrections. Channel 9 replayed the interview with the caption, "One of the most genuine moments on television this decade." That afternoon, I went out. People recognized me, but instead of contempt, they nodded hello. A young flower seller pressed a small bouquet of lavender into my hands. "I watched your interview," she said. "My mom cried. You made me realize no one's perfect, but anyone can be sincere." I smiled, feeling my chest lighten for the first time in a long while. From down the block, Bennett pulled up and handed me a thin folder. "Martha confessed," he said. In her statement, "I just wanted him to know what it feels like to be misunderstood." He paused, voice lowering. She also said, if she could, she'd apologize to Susan. That jealousy ruined 2 lives. I nodded, eyes stinging. Martha was swallowed by an old darkness, but at least she let the truth into the light. That evening I turned on the TV. A special called Untold Stories revisited the case, but unlike earlier coverage, it refused to sensationalize. The reporter focused on silence, misunderstanding, and the power of apology. He ended with this: "Sometimes justice doesn't reside in a courtroom. It resides in the hearts of those brave enough to look back at themselves." The screen faded from Susan's photo to a clip of me and David at a court mediation, my hand on his shoulder, his quiet nod before he pulled me into a long, wordless hug. The country watched that moment, and for the first time I saw a comment beneath the video. He didn't just clear his name, he made us rethink the way we judge. A week later, universities wrote inviting me to lecture again. I declined. I'm not the old Professor Hale who believed intellect could save the world. Now I'm just a man learning how to listen. David and I opened a small nonprofit, the Susan Foundation, for families fractured by misunderstanding, offering counseling and support. On our walls, photos of Susan among lavender fields. Beneath them, a line: "Truth is not to blame, silence is." At the opening, I kept my remarks brief. Thank you for letting the truth breathe. Thank you for daring to forgive. And if anyone out there is carrying a sentence unsaid, please say it before it's too late. Because silence is how we kill the ones we love. People rose and applauded, long and warm. In the crowd, I saw David, smiling for the first time in years. He stepped close and whispered, "Dad, I think Mom's proud." I gripped his shoulder and looked up at a sky slipping into dusk. The light was gentle now, no longer the harsh glare of trial day. "No, son," I said. "Your mother isn't proud. She's at peace. And that is the truest justice." The city's central courtroom was packed. Outside, a misting rain, soft as Susan's breath. I sat in the front row, my old suit tight across my chest, her letter clenched in my hand like a talisman. Today was the last hearing, the one where justice would be written, not just on paper but into the hearts of those who still doubted. David sat 2 rows behind. His eyes weren't wounds anymore. They were steady, grown. When our gazes met, he gave a small nod. No words, just that. Enough to tell me we had followed the truth to the end. They brought Martha in wearing a pale gray prison jumpsuit. Her silver hair was wild, the makeup long gone. Her face looked caved in by time and guilt, but in her eyes there was still a flicker, not defiance, but the spent light of someone who'd lost to herself. The judge began. Today's proceedings concern the falsification of medical records and the incitement of defamation by Ms. Martha Keene, aggrieved party, Mr. Francis Hale, prosecution, your opening. The prosecutor rose, voice firm. We have evidence that the defendant fabricated a medical report, transmitted it from her own IP to multiple journalists, and fed false information to plaintiff's counsel in the earlier civil case between Mr. Hale and his son. Motive, personal revenge. Bennett stood. We also call a witness, Dr. Morgan, custodian of Susan Hale's medical file. The rear doors opened. A middle-aged man in a white coat entered. The room held its breath. He bowed, eyes heavy. Your Honor, he said, I confirm that Mrs. Susan Hale's authentic chart contains no error in dosage. She died of cardiac complications. No external force, no caregiver interference. When I saw the internal report making the rounds, I was stunned. It is not a document from our hospital. Bennett asked, Do you know who requested the file copy? Yes, a person identifying herself as the patient's colleague, claiming it was for post-trauma research. Name, Martha Keene. The room burst into noise. Martha lowered her head, hands trembling. The judge hammered the bench. Order! David looked at me, eyes flooding. I stayed still, certain Susan was somewhere in that room, resting her hand on my shoulder. Bennett stepped forward, voice calm but cutting. Ms. Keene, do you have anything to say? Martha lifted her head. For a single second, resistance flared. I only wanted fairness for Susan. She deserved to know who truly loved her and who only pretended. Fairness? Bennett asked. What justice is built on lies? The air thickened. Martha's lips quivered, and then she broke, sobbing like someone who had dropped her soul. I was jealous. I wanted him to hurt the way I did. I never imagined I would end up killing the only friend I had. Silence. David bowed his head, eyes tight. From the windows the rain quickened, as if the sky were weeping for a lost soul. Bennett softened. Your Honor, we won't belabor this. The truth has said enough. Susan Hale's death was not a crime, but the consequence of silence, jealousy, and hearts that wouldn't speak when it mattered. From today on, let the name Susan Hale be restored, not just as a victim, but as a woman who taught us how to forgive. The judge nodded and made notes. Court will recess for 10 minutes. We will return with our ruling. I looked toward Martha. She couldn't meet my eyes. Only David, Bennett, and I remained upright in the whitened light of the courtroom, listening to the rain sink with our own hearts. The legal battle was nearly over, but the sentence that mattered, the one each heart would carry, was only beginning. 3 strikes of the gavel. The room fell still. The judge returned to the bench, stern-faced, eyes heavy. Outside, the rain had stopped, replaced by that wan light you only see after a storm, the kind that whispers, It's over now. The court finds, the judge said, each word deliberate, that Mrs. Martha Keene is guilty of falsifying documents and willfully spreading false information, causing grave damage to the reputation and mental well-being of others. Sentence, 4 years imprisonment plus damages for Mr. Francis Hale and the family of the late Susan Hale. The words landed softly and shook everything. No one clapped. No one cheered. The room bowed its head, not to a victory, but to a truth bruised and battered on its way to air. Martha sat limp. Her hands shook. Tears spilled down her worn cheeks. As the officers approached, she turned to me unexpectedly, voice raw. Francis, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I thought making you hurt would make me less alone, but it only killed me before the verdict ever came. I stood and stepped closer. Flashbulbs popped like hail, but I didn't care. I looked into her reddened eyes and said quietly, I hated you. But Susan didn't want me to carry hate. I forgive you, Martha. Not to erase what you did, but so I can live, she crumpled, sobbing. The officers guided her away, their steps dragging the past along with them. David rose and came to me. He said nothing, just pulled me into a tight embrace, the hug of a son who had lost his father in a storm of doubt and found him again. I heard him whisper, I'm sorry for believing the worst. I put my hand on his shoulder. No, son, you did what a grieving child does. I didn't listen to your mother. You did. You heard her even when she was gone. He nodded through tears. Around us, people wept. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a rite of forgiveness. Outside the courtroom, Bennett clasped my hand. It's done, he said. Justice is where it belongs. I smiled thinly. Not mine, Bennett. It's Susan's, and anyone brave enough to tell the truth, even late. He nodded, eyes warm and wet. We stepped out onto the courthouse steps. Reporters surged with mics and cameras. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I paused and spoke, calm, carrying. Thank you for covering this story. Today I don't want to talk about the sentence. I want to talk about what we failed to hear when we had the chance. Truth doesn't have just one shape. It lives in how we look at each other. And if you lose someone, ask yourself this. Did you ever really listen to them? A young reporter, hands shaking, asked, Mr. Hale, if Susan were alive, what would you say to her? I was quiet a moment, then looked up. I'd tell her, I finally learned how to love you the right way, Susan. Late, but true. Silence. Then the shutters burst again, but no one said a word. David stood beside me, gripping my hand. Late sunlight arced across us, a soft halo on a father and his son. That evening, the news ran a short segment. The Hale case closes, justice and mercy both. The top comment online said only, sometimes forgiveness is the most beautiful sentence. I sat by the window and watched a veil of fine rain fall. The room was quiet. On the shelf, Susan's photo caught the lamplight. I touched the glass and whispered, You see, Susan, the truth was heard in the end, and now it breathes, softly, but real. That night after court, I came home, to the old house that had been a battlefield of memory, now holding only the dry scent of lavender in the air. Everything looked the same, but I wasn't. On the table, stacks of filings, headlines, letters of apology. I didn't read them. I just stared at Susan's photo on the wall, her gentle, tilted smile, those eyes that seemed to hold a whole world. My heart trembled the way it did the first day I met her. You see, Susan, I murmured, justice stood with us. But it didn't arrive with a gavel. It arrived with tears. I settled into the worn armchair. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock hands move. Inside me, all the noise went still, leaving only a private conversation between the husband I used to be and the man I am now. I once thought justice meant winning. No, it is truth acknowledged, even if it comes late. I once thought love meant holding tight. No, it's letting go when someone needs air. I once thought forgiveness was weakness. No, it's courage, 10 times stronger than revenge. I laughed softly. So much of what I taught my students was wrong. Justice doesn't live in statutes. It lives in the moment a person chooses mercy over anger. Love isn't in vows. It's in how we face our failures. Out back, the garden glistened from the afternoon rain. Where Susan's white roses once grew, only a few stubborn stems remained. I knelt, pressed my hands into the soil. The damp earth rose, rich, alive. I made you lonely, I said, voice shaking. But I promise, for the rest of my life, no one around me will be silenced by fear again. A small wind moved through the trees, the sound of Susan's laugh from long ago, warm and light. I closed my eyes and heard the past again, David laughing in the yard, Susan calling me from the kitchen, her whisper, Don't be so serious, Francis. Life is short. Now I understood. She never left. She simply moved to the place we call peace. A few weeks later, David and I officially opened the Susan Foundation, a place for those slandered or misunderstood, where families broken by doubt could find their way back. We kept it simple. In the backyard where Susan once planted her roses, white candles circled her photo. David spoke, his voice steady. Mom once wrote, Truth can't breathe if we strangle it with pride. Today, I know, truth doesn't just breathe, it heals, and the person who taught me that is my father. I couldn't speak. I just held his hand. And in his eyes I saw Susan, gentle, forgiving, free. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone among the spent candles. Their faint light warmed Susan's picture until it seemed she was smiling right at me. I opened the brown leather notebook, her last journal. On the final page, slanted and tear-blurred, she'd written, "If you've read this far, know that I never once regretted loving you. I only hope you learn to love by listening, not by logic. Because love, Francis, doesn't need to be right, only real." I closed the book, heart shaking, and whispered, "I hear you, Susan. This time, for real." A breeze stirred, carrying the scent of lavender like an answer. I looked up. The clouds were parting to let a milky moonlight spill across the garden, catching on rosebuds pushing back through the soil. I smiled, tears quiet on my face. In the end, justice wasn't made to punish. Justice is the moment a human heart is bright enough to forgive. Greenfall County Prison sits out past the city limits, where the fields are scorched and the wind never stops cutting. 3 months after the verdict, a letter arrived. Envelope wrinkled, handwriting slanted and shaky. Sender, Martha Keene. I sat with it for hours before opening it. The anger was gone. What remained was a strange, hushed sadness, like fate refusing to close its chapter. Francis, if you're reading this, I'm not the person you used to know. Prison didn't kill me. It just held up a mirror so I could see the monster I'd been feeding for years. I thought I was strong when I made you fall. The truth is, I fell the moment I began to lie. I paused. Ink had bled through in places. Tears, most likely. The first nights here, I didn't sleep. They took everything. Clothes, mirrors, dignity. Left me with a blanket and a concrete wall. I hear women crying for their children. Hear the metal doors slam. But what haunts me isn't the doors. It's Susan's laugh, inside my head. I see her in dreams, standing in a lavender field, saying nothing, just looking at me. And I know she doesn't hate me. That is what breaks me. My chest loosened. If anyone had won, it was Susan, not with words, but with mercy. The Hale case had faded from headlines. The storm had passed, but in the prison's shadow, Martha was paying, day by quiet day. A guard Bennett knew told us she kept to herself, spoke to no one, asked for work in the library. Most days you'd find her at the last table, hunched over worn psychology texts, writing constantly, as if trying to translate her own soul. One inmate told a reporter, "She doesn't cry or complain, but if anyone starts a fight, she covers her ears and whispers someone's name. Sounds like Susan." One time I saw her stick wildflowers into the slot of her cell door. Nobody knew why. 2 years later, a re-entry nonprofit reached out. Martha wanted to send me a manuscript, her prison notebook. I received it. The title page read, "The People I No Longer Hate." Inside, Martha wrote, "I believed that if justice took my side, I'd be at peace. Justice means nothing if your heart has rotted." In here, I learned how to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Susan, for wanting you to disappear so I wouldn't have to see love in your eyes. I'm sorry, Francis, for making you carry the blame for my darkness, and I'm sorry to myself for forgetting that love is never the same thing as possession. When I finished, Bennett asked, "Will you write back?" I shook my head. No, some apologies don't need replies. If they're true, they'll find their way home. A few months later, a small notice ran in the local paper. Inmate Martha Keene dies of cardiac complications. Final request. Bury me where there is light. I stared at the line for a long time. The next morning, David and I drove to the southern cemetery. We left a small lavender sprig atop a new grave. No name, just a plain white marker. "Dad, do you really forgive her?" David asked quietly. I nodded. "Not because she deserves it, but because your mother won't be at peace if I carry hate, and because those who hurt us are still part of our story." Wind moved across the field, earth damp mingling with wildflower. I said, almost to the breeze, "Let her rest. Even darkness needs a place to dissolve." We walked away. The afternoon sun stretched long on the road behind us. I didn't look back, because for the first time it felt like the past was being buried with the guilt. After Martha's nameless burial, David vanished from foundation meetings. He asked for a month off. I didn't pry. I knew he was facing the hardest verdict, neither from a judge nor the crowd, but from himself. On a Saturday night, a soft knock. David stood there, thinner, unshaven, eyes hollowed by sleepless weeks. He hugged me so tightly I heard my bones creak. Dad, I've been using Mom's pain to punish you. I'm sorry." I patted his back and said nothing. Not, "It's okay," not, "I understand." Comfort can ring cheap when it's rushed. Instead, I brewed 2 cups of tea and set them by Susan's letter. We sat in silence and let the quiet do its work, untangling the thorns around the heart. Days later, David started therapy through our foundation partners. The first question the clinician asked, "If your mother were alive, what would she want you to do now?" David lowered his head. "Live well, and stop hiding behind being a victim." That's where his amends began. No justifications, no disappearing into the role of the penitent to earn pity, just walking straight into the pain. He returned to my old storage space, full of cameras, tape reels, and relics of our youth. Every night he digitized recordings of his mother's voice, scattered laughter, soft notes from counseling sessions. He labeled, organized, laying order onto memory like a private right. One night he pulled a small, dusty music box from the bottom of a crate. When he opened it, Schubert's serenade played, slow and warm, beneath the velvet lining, a folded slip. For David, open when you're ready to love without fearing loss. Mom. Inside was a brief to-do list, things Susan wanted him to do in her stead. Go to Franklin facility, hug a stranger and say, "I believe you can start again." Give my old guitar to the first kid brave enough to tell the truth about what they fear. Someday, take your father's hand and walk across the Riverton Bridge at sunset, where he first confessed his love, and say, "Thank you for loving Mom in the way you knew." David handed me the note. He didn't cry, but his fingers trembled. A door inside him had just opened. The next week he visited Franklin. He spoke to men about to re-enter the world, told them about Mom, about his own mistakes. A tattooed man named Ramon asked, "Do you hate yourself for believing the wrong story so long?" David gave a tired smile. "I don't hate the man I was yesterday. He survived the only way he knew." Ramon hugged him, rough, real. That day David finished the first item. He hugged a stranger and told him, "I believe you can start again." Back home, David launched a small program at the foundation, October Notes, where people write the words they never said to those they've lost. He hung Susan's guitar at the front with a sign. "If you dare tell the truth about your fear, take the guitar home." A 14-year-old named Malik stepped up, stammering, "I'm afraid my mom will leave me because I'm too much like my dad." The room went still. David handed him the guitar and taught him 3 chords. The strumming was clumsy and offbeat, but perfectly in time with courage. Then came the final item on Susan's list. One autumn evening we walked hand in hand across the Riverton Bridge. River wine cool against our faces, sun tilting over red brick roofs. David stopped mid-span, looking west where the light poured into the water like liquid gold. "Dad," he said, "thank you for loving Mom in the way you knew, even if it wasn't perfect." I laughed, voice rough. "I learned to love again, because of you." We stood there and let the sunset stitch up what was left to mend. Work at the foundation surged. David led the case review team, each week flagging possible defamation cases, coordinating with attorneys, press, and counseling. He wasn't hot anymore. When a troll lashed out online, he didn't argue. He sent a link. "If you've ever been misunderstood, this is a place to tell the truth." Strangely, many wrote back to apologize. One evening after group therapy, David handed me an envelope. "I think Mom would want you to have this." Inside, a copy of Susan's very first teaching assignment as a TA. On the back in her hand, "If one day I go quiet, don't be afraid. I'm just listening to the world grow loud, waiting to hear you whisper, 'I'm here.'" I traced the faded blue ink. That night, I stood before Susan's picture and said softly, "I'm here." Redemption didn't make David a saint. He still had sleepless nights and flinched when anyone said "forged file," but he didn't run. He turned those jolts into a class on working with shame. Acknowledge. Name it. Small action. Gratitude. In the final session, he asked everyone to write 1 line to the person they'd hurt. Pens moved. Paper filled. I wrote 2. When I handed mine in, David read it and smiled. "I've learned to love you by listening, Susan." By season's end, we received an unexpected gift, a donation to open 3 satellite locations. Sender, Ramon, just back from Franklin, now running a carpentry shop. The note read only, "Because of a hug." That night, under a bright sky, David spoke to me, and to his mother. I don't owe you anything now, except to live decently. The rest, I'll leave to time. I squeezed his shoulder and nodded. We went inside. On the windowsill, the serenade music box played, old and new at once, as if love had finally learned how to breathe in rhythm. By the next spring, Riverton had changed, not with new signs or taller buildings, but with a thoughtful kind of quiet. People still gathered at the corner cafe, still traded stories, but, I heard that, didn't tumble out as easily as before. Truth, after all this, had taught a whole town how to use its mouth again. One afternoon, David and I stood before the public library. A new wooden plaque read, "The Susan Foundation. Program, How to Listen." Opening day was small, no fanfare. A few dozen people, teachers, parents, students, even a couple of journalists who'd once misreported my case. I studied their faces, familiar and distant, some who had turned away, some who went silent while I was stoned in the square. Today they were here, not to gawk, but to understand. A young reporter stood, voice unsteady. "I wrote the first piece accusing you, Professor Hale. I'm sorry, I didn't verify. I chased clicks. When I watched your Channel 9 interview, I realized truth can't live inside a headline." I answered as gently as the spring air. "We've all been wrong. The difference is who's brave enough to say it. Today, you just were." Silence held a moment. Then Lynn, my former neighbor, the woman who spoke up at the memorial years ago, rose. "I don't apologize for telling the truth," she said, "but I do apologize for staying quiet afterward. I was afraid of being disliked, of being labeled. Now I understand. When you're silent in the face of a lie, you've already chosen its side." Applause. Long, warm. I looked over the room. Faces like pages torn and stitched back with white thread. Not perfect. Whole enough. How to Listen was David's idea. Each week we hosted open circles where people told stories of believing the wrong thing, repeating the wrong thing, or hurting someone with a rumor. No one was judged. At the end, each speaker received a small wooden key carved with "Listen." David said, "Every rumor is the wrong door. The key is a reminder to open the right one." At the first session, a teacher shared that she had told her class, "Mr. Hale poisoned his wife because a parent had said it." She cried. "I didn't realize I was making kids fear marriage, with a story I never checked." David handed her the first key. She hugged it like a second chance. A month later, the program spread. Articles reframed Riverton as the first American town to teach listening in its schools. Middle schoolers got a special class. Hype or verified? Kids learned how to trace sources, ask better questions, and say, "I don't know enough yet to decide." A 10-year-old asked me, "Sir, what if people spread rumors and you can't prove they're wrong?" I knelt to his eye level. "Then live so the truth defends you. Rumors don't last long in the hearts of decent people." He nodded and wrote in his notebook, "Truth doesn't need to shout." By year's end, the foundation opened a small exhibit in the library, "The Cost of Rumors." On the walls, old clippings, false headlines, beside letters from those who apologized for believing them. At the center, a large photo of Susan in her lavender garden, smiling, teacup in hand. Below, a brass plaque, "Every word can save a person or murder a trust." Visitors stood in silence for long minutes, no selfies, no chatter. At the exit, they signed the guest book, lines stacking up. "I believed the wrong thing, now I choose to listen. I laughed at someone's pain, now I'm quiet so I can understand. Forgiveness starts when we stop lying." On opening night, David stood beside me and watched the crowd ebb and flow. "Dad, I think Mom would love this place." "She would," I said, "because here people aren't just talking about her, they're learning how to live like her." Outside, the hallway filled with the scent of lavender. I closed my eyes and heard Susan's laugh in the breeze, soft as a blessing. And I understood. The cost of rumor isn't only years in prison or tears shed. It's the curriculum life forces us to learn. From a town that once felt like an arena for judgment, Riverton had become the starting place for a new kind of trust. The belief that if people are willing to listen, even mistakes can bloom. If you asked me, where does regret begin, I'd say, it doesn't start with tears. It starts the moment we stop making excuses. Martha Keene learned that later than anyone. In the last weeks of her life, she lay in the prison infirmary, a small window framing a rare patch of sunlight spilling onto the yard. The nurse told me that every morning Martha asked to sit up and watch the light fall through the bars. She would say, "I used to live in a house with wide windows and never saw the light. Now I'm in the darkest place, and I'm finally learning how to see it." On her bedside table there were always two things: a frayed old Bible and a newspaper photo of Susan, already yellowing around the edges. At night, Martha talked to that picture the way a lonely child talks to an imaginary friend. "Susan, I miss your laugh. But if there's a next life, don't befriend me again. I don't deserve it." Her regret didn't explode. It seeped, quiet, steady, as rain seeps into brick, loosening each proud stone inside her chest. Once Martha believed she was the one wrongly unloved, that Francis owed her a confession. But alone inside four walls, she understood. He had never promised her anything. She was the one who mistook silence for assent. A young inmate named Ellie told how Martha apologized after snapping in the library. When Ellie asked, "What are you sorry for?" Martha answered, "For forgetting I was once the hurt one, too." That night, Ellie told the nurse, "I heard her cry, not loud, like someone washing her face with tears." Regret, maybe, is the one thing we can't counterfeit. After Martha died, the last pages of her journal were sent to me. Bennett brought them on a rainy afternoon. He set the thin notebook on the table and said, "You should read this. Not to forgive, to understand." The final page was written in slanted script, the ink blurred. "I used to want the truth to belong to me, but truth belongs to no one. It travels with whoever is brave enough to be hurt by it. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid Susan will see me and be sad. If anyone asks what I regret most, I'll say this: I regret making good people spend their kindness on me." I closed the notebook. I didn't cry. I felt something in me unlatch. Forgiveness, it turns out, doesn't end the story. It prolongs the conversation until two souls can understand each other in quiet. Since Martha's passing, I've been dreaming more. In one dream, I'm back in the last lecture I gave before retiring. Susan sits in the front row, her eyes full of trust. Martha stands at the door, no longer furious, just bone-tired. I lecture on guilt, how people fail not because they're evil, but because they're weak, and too afraid to name that weakness. The room is still. I ask, "Does anyone here believe regret is a punishment?" Susan smiles and shakes her head. "No, Francis. Regret is the final gift God gives us, so we can return to being human." Martha lowers her head. Tears fall onto the tile. I wake slick with cold sweat. Outside, rain whispers against the windows. I turn on the lamp. In the mirror, my face is old and creased, but the resentment is gone from my eyes. One afternoon, I bring a bundle of lavender to Greenfall Cemetery. Martha's small grave lies to the right under a maple's shade. No flowers, no visitors. I set the lavender down and say softly, "Susan forgave you. So do I. The rest, leave it to the wind." A breeze rises, mixing the smell of flowers with the damp of earth. Somewhere in that hush I hear Susan's voice. "I'm still here, in every choice you make to forgive." I walk away. The sun sinks behind a red-edged bank of clouds, radiant and solitary. And I understand. True regret isn't a feeling. It's an awakening to the price of a lie, not the sentence it earns, but the emptiness that remains when there's no one left to love. From that day, I began keeping a journal again, not for Susan, for myself. A journal of learning when to keep quiet. On the first page I wrote, "I used to keep quiet because I feared the truth. Now I keep quiet so I can hear it." Some nights when the town is asleep, I sit in Susan's old room and play the tapes David restored. Her voice is light as breath. "Francis, if there's another life, don't love me with fear. Love me like you love a song, knowing it will end, but singing with your whole heart anyway." Each time I listen, I go still. I don't cry anymore. I feel my chest loosen, as if memory were finally sliding back into its rightful place. David often drops by late. He doesn't ask questions. He takes the chair opposite mine and drinks tea. Our talks are short, but they carry the weight of years we lost. Once he said, "Dad, I always thought forgiveness was something you give other people. Turns out, the hardest part is forgiving yourself." I nodded. Yes. When we do wrong, we still have hope. When we despise ourselves, we kill the hope as well." He fell quiet. The sentence dropped into us and shattered into small lights. Since the trial, I've been invited to speak at universities. I don't lecture on law or ethics. I talk about the weight of words left unsaid. I start each talk with, "I'm not here to tell a tragedy. I'm here to say that silence isn't always noble. Sometimes it's a sin dressed as patience." A student once asked, "Professor, how do you know you've truly forgiven?" I smiled. "When you can revisit the past and your heart no longer wants revenge." That night I came home late. David was waiting on the porch with 2 folding chairs. "There's a place I want to show you." He led me up the northern hill where Susan used to paint landscapes. On the crest, he'd set a small wooden marker carved with, "Here is where mistakes are buried and love is planted again." Below it, hundreds of lavender blooms swayed in a soft, clean fragrance. My knees gave way. I cried, not from pain, but from a strange peace that only comes after you've walked to the far edge of regret. David looked at me and whispered, "Dad, I've forgiven myself. What about you?" I kept my eyes on the flowers moving in the wind. "I don't know yet, but tonight, for the first time, I'm not ashamed to say my own name." He rested a hand on my shoulder. "Mom would be proud. She always believed you only needed to tell the truth once, to yourself." We stayed until the last of the light disappeared. The hill turned honey gold. In that moment I heard Susan in the wind repeating the line that haunted me for years. "You only need to learn when to be quiet and when to speak." Now I understood. Keep silent to hear another, not to bury yourself. In the days that followed, David launched a new foundation project, Letters to the Past, a place for people to write to the version of themselves who made the mistake. At the opening, I was asked to compose the first letter. My hands trembled, not from fear this time, as I wrote, "Dear Francis, if you're reading this, you've outlived the days when you wanted to disappear. Remember, you shouted, you failed, you hurt the woman you loved. But none of that canceled your right to be loved. When Susan forgave you, it wasn't to make you comfortable, it was to teach you this. Regret is proof your heart is still alive. Spend what's left not on repayment, but on love." I folded the letter and handed it to David. He read and smiled. "You wrote it to yourself, but it sounds like Mom writing to you." I laughed. "Maybe it is. Your mother never stopped teaching us, even after she left." That night we went home. Susan's music box was still on the table. Serenade chimed again. David tuned her old guitar and hummed along. I listened and felt my regret thin like smoke until only warmth remained. Before bed I added one last line to my journal. "I have forgiven Martha. I have forgiven Susan. I have forgiven David. And at last, I have forgiven myself. From here on, I don't need anyone's absolution, only the courage to live decently." I closed the book. Outside, the sky was moonless, heavy with stars. A night breeze slipped through the cracked door, carrying the faint scent of lavender. Somewhere, whatever that means, Susan was smiling, and for the first time in years, I smiled back. Not the tight smile of a guilty man, a true one, free of shadow. That autumn, for the first time in years, I woke without fear. No nightmare replaying the night Susan died. No mornings opening my eyes to a room that felt like stone. Only birds at the eaves, the hiss of a kettle, and the jasmine tea Susan used to love. I stood at the window and looked down at the garden. The lavender David planted was blooming, a purple path along the walk. Not even, not straight, but beautiful in a truthful way, like my life, broken in places, and still turning toward the light. In the morning I headed to the Susan Foundation. And it isn't just counseling and community programs anymore. It's become a small shelter for people who've been judged. Some were once inmates, some were victims, some were the ones who spread lies. Here they sit at the same table, learning to listen, to write apologies, and to stop being afraid of the past. David stepped out of a counseling room, sleeves rolled, a gentle half-smile on his face. I looked at my son and realized, sometimes the amends one generation makes are the gift the next generation gets to keep. "Dad, the advanced listening class is full today," he said. "Even my old teacher came." "Miss Turner?" "Yeah. She wants to apologize for staying quiet when the kids gossiped about Mom." I nodded. Sometimes apologies arrive late. They're still a kind of miracle. That afternoon I walked the town. People have learned to smile when they see me, not because of reputation, but because our story has become a shared lesson. Children ran past singing the line painted on the library wall, "Speak softly, the truth is sleeping." David wrote that line as the motto for our media project. Riverton, once notorious for rumor, now gets called the town of gentle truth. I stopped at the cafe by the river. They'd renovated. There's a corner dedicated to the foundation. On the wall hangs a photo of me, Susan, and David when we were young. Under it, someone had written, "Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes your heart wide enough for more light." I ordered a cappuccino. The barista, a young woman, recognized me and said softly, "I lost my mom when I was 8. When I watched your interview, I didn't cry because I felt sorry. I cried because I knew I needed more courage." I smiled. Sometimes courage isn't getting up. It's staying still and not running away. That evening I came home and opened Susan's journal. I've read it 100 times, but tonight was different. I wasn't searching for where I failed. I simply wanted to hear her one more time. "Francis, if your heart ever feels light as breath, it means you've let go of your pride and kept the love. When that day comes, don't cling. Let things be. I'll still be there, in the light." I set my hand on the line and smiled. The lamplight fell across our wedding photo, now the color of honey. "I've let go, Susan," I said, "and I kept the love." That night I slept through. No dreams, no sudden waking. In sleep I saw Susan walking toward me, not a shadow anymore but whole. She took my hand, her voice as soft as wind. "I told you, Francis, forgiveness is a way of loving." I smiled. The dream faded. The peace stayed. A year later, the Susan Foundation was no longer just a small office in Riverton. We'd opened 4 more chapters: Chicago, Denver, Atlanta, Portland, places where the harmed, the hurting, and the healing could find a home. No gatekeeping, no background checks, only the first question every volunteer learns to ask: "What are you carrying that you haven't said yet?" David and I traveled the country telling our story. In each city, people stopped seeing us as a father and son who survived a tragedy. They saw 2 men carrying the light of a woman who's gone into places it had never reached. On a winter morning, as we wrapped an event in Denver, a woman in a green correctional uniform approached with a white envelope. "Ellen Moore," she said. "I was a guard at Greenfall. I looked after Martha Keene at the end." I froze for a heartbeat. Her smile was kind. "Before she died, Martha left something. She asked me to give it to Mr. Hale when he was ready to believe she truly repented." Inside the envelope, a hand-woven strand of dried lavender beads, faintly scented with oil. Tucked with it, a crooked note. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Please give this to anyone living in guilt with no words to speak. If Susan can see, I hope she understands. In the end, I learned to love without possessing." I stood still. Snow in the air, lavender in my hands, my chest tightened. David's hand found my shoulder. "Dad, maybe this is how she makes peace. Nobody wants to die misunderstood." I nodded, squeezing the beads. "Then I should do the last thing she asked, put them where someone needs them." 3 months later, we opened our 5th chapter inside Greenfall itself, the place that once held Martha. Fresh white paint, new windows for the light. On opening day, I hung the lavender strand in the main therapy room beneath a brass plate engraved with Susan's words. "Kindness doesn't choose where it's born. It only needs a place to bloom." More than 100 incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people came. An older man spoke, voice rough. "We've heard about you, about Miss Susan, about Martha. A lot of us did bad things. But today, we believe there's a road back, if someone points the way." The applause rose, long, real. I looked around and saw something bright on so many faces I knew too well. Hope. As we left at dusk, David said, "Mom would be smiling." "Not just your mother," I answered. "Martha, too." We turned and looked at the building. Warm light spilled through the windows, touching the lavender beads as they swayed. To me, they were a sign of forgiveness fully formed, where dark and light finally meet. And in my heart, Susan's old benediction rose, fresh as ever. "No one is a villain forever, Francis. Only souls who still haven't learned how to love well." On the last night of our trip, I sat alone in a small airport hotel. The city outside was a field of calm, gold light, so peaceful it felt almost foreign. David slept in the next room, the son who once despised me, now my companion on this long work of mending. I opened my notebook and wrote the final page of October notes. At the top, to Susan, to Martha, to David, and to anyone who has ever lost their faith. Then I began a kind of prayer that wasn't for anyone else to hear, so that I could finally understand myself. I spent most of my life believing justice lived in courtrooms. But real justice appears when a person can face a mirror and say, I was wrong, and I still deserve to live well. I thought love belonged to those who were young enough to fix their mistakes. Now, near the end, I've learned love has no age. It only has honesty. I lost everything once, my name, my trust, and the woman I loved more than life. Out of that ruin, I found something I'd never noticed, the capacity to love again, though wounded. Susan taught me, forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It lets you walk forward without carrying the dark. Martha taught me that the one who hurts us most can reveal the deepest measure of our mercy. David taught me that on any road to redemption, the rarest prize isn't being forgiven, it's having the courage to seek the truth. I set the pen down and looked up. Night air slipped through the window's seam. I smiled. I spent half my life proving I was right. For the rest of it, I only want to be right with my heart. The next morning we flew home. As the car rolled over the old bridge, where Susan used to sketch, I saw 3 reflections on the river, myself, David, and Susan's tilted smile flickering in memory. I touched the window and whispered, You see this, Susan? We did it. The whole town is learning how to love without wounding. David turned, gentle smile in place. Dad, maybe that's what Mom wanted. Not to be remembered, but to make kindness unforgettable. I nodded. In the soft light I understood. Love doesn't die. It changes shape, from pain into compassion. That night at the Foundation's year-end gathering, I stepped onto a small stage. More than 100 faces looked up, people who had wept, been misjudged, and learned how to live again. I didn't bring notes. I just looked at them and spoke with the trying, ragged voice of a man who has walked to the end. We can't choose where we're born. We can choose how we treat each other. A true family isn't only blood. It's respect and love. Guard that, the way Susan guarded us, with her kindness. Applause swelled. Some cried. Some smiled. I stood there quietly, feeling how every old hurt had been turned, little by little, into light. Later that night, I lit candles in the lavender garden and let the wind carry the fragrance far. I looked up, not a prayer exactly, more like an invitation to anyone watching, listening, still living inside their hurt with the doors shut tight. If you've been misunderstood, betrayed, or lost your faith, don't be afraid to begin again. Sometimes the place you think is the end is exactly where your heart finds its freedom. I closed my eyes. The flames trembled. Lavender drifted on the air. Our story doesn't close here. It begins in the hearts of those brave enough to love, with respect and with mercy. And if you've ever wept because of a rumor, a misunderstanding, or someone you lost, stay with us. The next story will make you believe that even in darkness, kindness knows the way home.